This is a crazy story. So I remember when I was a kid, we were having a sleepover at the house, and I was like middle school age or whatever it was, and I remember my one friend was over, and I remember at one point he like completely freaked out. And I was like, what is going on? I didn't say anything to him, just kind of like, probably like soft jabs, oh, you're scared of the dark or something stupid like that. But he ended up calling his parents and wanted to get picked up at like 11 o'clock at night or midnight or something ridiculous like that. And I just was like, well, whatever, dude. Like that's, people are people. Preteens are funny, whatever. But I
Mhm.
remember talking to him like after the fact, and he talked about like this crazy experience he had with the mirror in our bathroom. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. It was weird. I don't want to talk about it. And we never spoke of it again. And it kind of reminded me of when we were talking before about like the whole like sleepover hijinks, that kind of a thing, which ultimately led me to the concept of Bloody Mary. So I don't know if he had an experience with Bloody Mary or not, but it was just a very, very weird scenario. So Bloody Mary, I don't really know the full history of it. History is definitely in my world of education. History is my weakest link. But Bloody Mary, it comes back to I believe it was Queen Mary the First of England. Some ties are to her. Another tie is to the Blood Countess, which I believe was Elizabeth, like Bathory. I don't even know if I'm saying her name right. And then there's another one has to do with I don't even know if it's the same person or not, but like this woman that murdered her children, like a local legend kind of thing. It's kind of like all over the map, but the concept is very interesting where it's like this thing lives in the mirror and you may be able to summon it, and the results range from like seeing something freaky to like it coming out of the mirror and killing you. So Bloody Mary, it's a weird thing. I don't even know. Have either of you have any experience? Have you had any experience with Bloody Mary?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, so my first experience with Bloody Mary, I was like a kid, and well, often is how it goes. I was probably
Last
like
week.
last week. I was talking to a friend. He said, "Bloody Mary." Okay, so we have this linen closet in the hallway in the old house, and it had a mirror on the inside. Now I'm four, and as you probably know from hearing different stories of Bloody Mary, it's like, well, what has to be involved in the summoning, right? Like a lot of times it's like a bathroom mirror, but that seemed to be left out of this particular uh, experience. So, uh, oldest brother decides we're gonna put this 4-year-old in the. Oh, well, I'll back up. So we're at the dinner table, and there's this discussion about Bloody Mary. They must have like heard it in school or something like that. And then the good Catholic parents chime in. Well, don't do that, because that's summoning the devil. So, 4 years old, I get thrown in this linen closet, and you're not getting out until you say Bloody Mary 3 times or whatever. And I still have like a visual memory of it. And it wasn't a woman's face. I thought I was summoning the devil. And so I see this thing in the top left corner of this image I have, this like yellowish, reddish figure starting to enter in the top left of the field. And I just freak out as a 4-year-old would, or anyone else for that matter. And yeah, let me out of the closet and whatever. That was the end of the experience. But to this day, when I have migraines, it starts in that corner of the visual field, um, and it'll sort of like bleed out from there. No, that is an interesting choice of words. It'll kind of bleed out from there, and it becomes this sort of glowing triangle. They're called auras in migraine world, But and uh, and in fact, the first time I noticed that I was having a migraine, I thought I was either having I was pretty drunk at the time, but a lot of stories start like that, right? But I was looking in a mirror and there was this blind spot in it that was like spreading, and I thought I was either having a psychic awakening or losing my mind. I didn't know, but again,
Are
I
those
was.
basically the same thing?
I don't know. Yeah, it depends on the perspective and the usefulness, I guess. Um, yeah, so actually, my migraine discovery is linked in with my first Bloody Mary experience, which also, um, yeah, which didn't include Mary or water, or it was just the straight up devil. So the first thing I ever summoned was the devil. I'll have that down on my
Well, I mean,
official.
if
When
you're
they
gonna
burn me
start
at the
out,
stake years from now, you
maybe.
could just
Yeah, I mean, like,
yeah,
I don't have it's not one of these things that I obviously know about it, like as a kid and stuff like that. I think of like, the but I don't. It's not something I ever did. I don't particularly like mirrors, generally speaking, especially like I don't know that. Does anyone like big mirrors at night? Like, it's like you're staring.
yeah,
It's like it is kind of a weird thing. But I did like before. We were talking about this. I did do some like, you know, I did a little like the stuff that I looked into. They were talking just like, when it was bringing it down the whole like sort of scrying, something I didn't know about. It was like women would do and like scrying thing in order to see like what their future was, particularly like who their husband might be. It seems like it's linked to like a Halloween kind of game, and
yeah,
but sometimes you might see a skull, which means you're gonna die or something like that. So it was like it wasn't about like a spirit getting you. But then I did find this thing that was like it was from a book from the 30s, and they were citing going through like Irish uh types of folklore, because obviously like a lot of different, going back to like Egyptian stuff, has like mirrors, scrying, things like that. And Chris, you probably would know, would be able to talk more about that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
But but they were actually saying like this translation was basically like using the mirror. It wasn't so much like it would, there was actually like a witch in the mirror, like,
Mm-hmm.
and like, and it's like, and if you were doing things, and it wasn't specifically like using the Bloody Mary thing to summon it, but there could be like literally like witches that live inside mirrors, or inside of like the like, see sort of crystal balls that like they were talking about dunking them in water and you'd see an evil face or something. And it was like really weird. So it's almost like this idea,
Yeah,
like I wonder if it like stems from that kind of like not just like scrying, but this like weird like, kind of belief that there's some kind of spirit inside of the mirror anyway, already, just like inherently.
right,
Like the
right.
magic mirror, on the wall kind of idea, like, it's like something's captured in there.
Yeah.
But
Well, in fact, so mentioning the magic mirror on the wall, it's kind of funny. Like when you look at some of the old, like the animated Disneys that are based on other stuff,
mhm.
but up until a certain point, they actually like they hang on to their occultism, like if you actually listen to, okay, so like what's Cinderella? Is that the one with the bippity boppity boo and the
I believe
pumpkin
so,
king?
yeah.
Yeah, so that actual song, the bippity boppity boo, there's all kinds of other weird language in there too. She's just doing incantations, and that actual one, the magic mirror on the wall. I had always heard it mirror, mirror on the wall, but it's magic mirror on the wall. And she summons up the witch queen or whatever. She summons up this like spirit thing that
Yeah,
lives in the mirror. She's like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it
He's
comes
like
up and
it's
it's
like
like a
it's like
little
traps.
mask
Like it's
thing.
almost like
Yeah,
a, yeah, like a
like
kind of
who do tell me, this spirit trapped in the mirror. And so, yeah, and that goes back to, so there's the idea. So if you go back to old school magic, at least old school post writing, but you've got records of the use of water bowls for scrying. Later down the line, you've got Johann Trithemius. Was he a priest, I guess, and also a big person in ritual magic? A lot of the cooler stuff we have goes back to Trithemius. And he has this thing about the art of trapping spirits in crystals. So there is this idea
like
of
Pokemon.
like Pokemon. He was the pre-runner of Pokemon. You can't catch them all, by the way. You can't
You
get
can't catch
they're
all the spirit.
you can't. Some of them are really difficult fish to catch, and in fact, more often than not, your result is going to be reading a bunch of stuff from a book and choking on incense for a few hours.
No.
So I'm curious, the idea of trapping spirits in crystals, is that related at all to like crystal energy, or they completely, they two completely different things?
I mean, they probably flap over each other a little bit because you've also got the idea of um, things that contain inherent power. So, like, if you get away from what some people call like high magic, where it's spheres and planes and rays and things like that, and you get down to straight up witchcraft, where it's roots and sticks and blood and animal parts and things like that. There's this idea that the thing itself contains like an essence. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of like the crystal stuff is like derived from that, like this idea of like you've got these weird shiny things, these shiny stones. I mean, you figure like before they're cut, they're these glassy, smoky kinds of things. But then once they're cut, the way those facets are reveal all kinds of distortions in how you look into it and how
Yeah,
it treats the
similar
shape.
to mirrors. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so I think it becomes so you've got the popular idea with modern contemporary summoning is you want a means of manifestation for the thing to show up. And so that can be like a billowing incense and like kind of think about the idea of like seeing like animal shapes in the clouds, or a Rorschach test or something like that. So you've got this thing that's got some level of ambiguity upon which you can then experience this image. We'll just leave it in those terms without making any metaphysical claims, but you've got this stuff going on. And so when you've got a mirror, or a crystal distorts things a little bit. There's light coming in from different angles and stuff, and you can just kind of space out into it. Now, another idea is that actually, like, because you're looking into this thing that creates this illusion of infinite depth, that it gives you a surface to hallucinate into. It's kind of like the idea of, maybe we might have talked about this previously, the idea of like when you've got an empty space, like the boogeyman, right? You're staring into a dark closet, but that's infinite space as far as you can tell. It's just darkness, and that's easier to hallucinate something into. So if you're doing that, staring into something with the theatrical underpinnings of this is to summon something, I think your experience of your likelihood of experiencing something like that is much higher than just wandering into the bathroom at 3 a.m, not
Well,
wanting to put the light on because it's don't want to wake yourself up.
let's jump back to the Bloody Mary thing for a minute. That I thought was like, I mean, I'll think of the most famous version of it to me, Candyman, the 1992. What made me think it's like that's always weird, and I think it's like the distortion between the seemingly original idea of like, well, it's like a fortune telling thing, like, or it's like, a magic
Right.
mirror giving you information, right? To
Yeah.
like this maleficent spirit. It also seems to like coincide with the whole like, well, we dare you to go do it. And the person's supposed to
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
like it's not real. And then the thing haunts you and eventually kills you for doing it. Like it's like
Yeah.
what if it's clearly not like it's not there to like it doesn't have any other purpose other than to like like you summon the thing and it causes your demise. And I feel like that's kind of the modern version for like that I think of it when I think of like it being a kid. Like that's the kind of like like not just mirrors being scary, but the ritual itself is supposed to be like, well, you don't believe it, so go do it, and then report back, and then like and then it's like, and that kid died.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a it's a like like 5 days later he never came back to school or something. It's a
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a like
It's interesting talking about mirrors. I can't remember who said this, but the idea is like, is anyone comfortable with mirrors? And I was actually, yeah, no pun intended, reflecting on this earlier today, and I was thinking, for me at least, I think I've seen too many horror movies where it's like the person they're in the bathroom or they're looking in a mirror, whatever,
yeah.
and they look away. But the mirrored image does not, or it's something like that, or it's like there's that disconnect between the real person and what happens in the mirror with that person. And like, there's always a part of you that's like, what if that happens? Like, what if all of a sudden I like look down and like I notice in my peripheral that this thing is still looking at me, or like you see something behind you and you turn around, but there's nothing there. Like in my head, like that's where I am with mirrors, and especially like late at night, it's like I don't even want to deal with any of that late at night. Like around noon time, like different story, but late at night when it's like I gotta go back to sleep.
Well, there's actually
Yeah,
like a thing
yeah.
like so there's this thing is called the Caputo effect is like what it basically is, and that when you are looking into a mirror and it's a dim light, you're actually it creates like a distorted image that you see, and the longer you stare at it, the more distorted it happens. It's like it's just some phenomenon, and then like I think they also did experiments where they were testing like you know neurotypical people versus people who were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and because obviously schizophrenia is a little more reality detached
Hmm.
as part of the as part of that diagnosis, it's like they would actually see even more stuff than someone because it just has to do with like this trigger that like because like low light and staring at a mirror long enough and you start seeing like reality is distorts in your face distorts, and they say it also might be linked sort of to things like body dysmorphia and things of that nature, like because you'd be staring at this for an increased period of time and like over and over and you get this like distorted image of yourself that you then translate into your consciousness or whatever, so this is like so there actually is some kind of psychological effect that like it makes sense like you would be like weird about that, like because it does kind of happen, it's if you're just so
Hmm.
there's a a tracked phenomenon about it. So yeah. Mm.
Yeah, it's but back to the horror movies for a second. Actually, the horror movie that follows me around is Poltergeist 2.
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh
yes.
And,
no.
and here's the reason. So first of all, I'm mildly freaked out by like weird Christian preachers. And also fascinated. It's well, that'll be that weird Christian preachers and another conversation.
The evil
Um,
preacher. That's the,
so get the comments going. Um, but Poltergeist 2, and I think the thing is, so if you've got something like Bloody Mary proper and Candyman, okay,
Mhm.
and even jump across to Beetlejuice, which is not a mirror spirit, but it's the thing about how you say the name several times and they show up,
Yeah,
right?
and it's always three times, which is always a weird thing. Like
I
it's like
found other versions of Bloody Mary. Sometimes it's 13. Once it was
okay,
47.
I saw
wow,
that
Like,
too.
yeah,
that's
like
weird.
it's
Yeah.
like I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
the variations on the Mary thing, we should definitely like dive into that. But yeah, but Poltergeist 2, here's the thing about it. Poltergeist 2, they were not invited. See, like Beetlejuice, Bloody Mary, Candyman, uh, those you had to call up. You had to invite them, even if you were the kid that didn't believe. Or if you were like the one that was in the group that was doing it, that was like, come on, guys, stop messing around. Because there's always that one, in these, this is stupid, don't. Um, but yeah, so you've got that thing going on. But when with Poltergeist 2, it's like, no, they just show up. They want Carol Ann. They want her powers, and they're gonna follow her around from one mirror and reflective surface to another. It's any reflective surface. They show up in puddles. I'm getting myself goosebumps here. It's like it was talking about those Christian preachers. But they'll show up in puddles and mirrors. Yeah, that did more damage to me than probably the actual linen closet experience. Um, because it's just that, and it is that thing. It's like you look down at the sink and then you look up and it's like stop, you know. And you got to think like, well, would real spirits do it like that? Would they be like, oh man, this is gonna freak them out? He looks up from that, washing his face. I'm gonna be there all like, yeah, with a freaky look on my face, and a sound effect like in the movies. The sound effects in the movies are the thing that really sell a lot of the effect. It's not just that there's a different face in the mirror. It also goes, no, no. All right, someone else talk. I'm giving myself goosebumps.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on Poltergeist too. And like the freaky preacher guy with like, what's that line? Is like, God is in his holy temple, or whatever he says.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
it's just kind of creepy. And he has like the
yeah,
look too. And
yeah.
everything about that is just like, nah, nah. I think I saw that once and I was like, that is good enough for me. I'm done with this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, when you're talking about the looking down at the sink and looking up and I
yeah.
immediately thought of like, it'd be fun if we put like a scare clip, like a jump. I don't know what they're called, but like in the video at that point in time. So people are watching, all of a sudden like this thing jumps and like you get the sudden sound.
It's like
Um,
something's behind you. Oh
yeah.
God. It's
But I
like-
don't know if we want to be that mean to our reviewers if they would like that. If they're like, that's it, I'm done with these people, these clowns.
Yeah, we're just trying to get them so far. Let's not chase them
Let's
away.
scare them away.
Yeah, we gotta summon them, say their name 3 times. But yeah, yeah, Bloody Mary. So variations on it. You got Mary the First, who killed a lot of Protestants.
Yeah.
Then you've got um, various people named Mary Worth or various versions of Mary Worth, and that is usually she was a witch that they killed. She was a Puritan woman accused of witchcraft who they killed. Um, and there are different versions.
Wasn't there
on
also
that.
one that was like she was a person who killed runaway slaves or something like that?
Killed runaway
Yeah,
slaves?
like and it's like
Yeah, there was one that she was a healer in the village and was actually secretly killing the children of the village, and then they went and killed that again. That's another one where she's secretly a witch. Um, yeah, and then there's the whole she's a teenager that was waiting for her prom ride to pick her up. So it's like, or she was a hitchhiker, or she was oftentimes then she's like a murder victim, or she was hit by a car, or
I mean, it's weird that none of these things have to do with the mirror itself. You think it would be like she died getting them the mirror smashed over her or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
Like it would just say like it just feels like there should be something mirror related in the legend, not just like, well, she's this mass murdering person or like evil secret witch or something like that. It's just like that like it just feels like there's very little connection to the mirror thing itself. It's like
And that makes me think, I wonder if it kind of started out as like this parlor trick, and then it's like, how do we tie this into something to make it more real? I almost wonder if it was
yeah.
like that kind of a backfill.
yeah,
Well,
like
yeah. And I
like
think
you could
so.
say any incantation to make it happen, and it just happened to become that kind of thing. Or it
Yeah.
was like the whole idea of like, people at some point were very scared of spirits living inside of mirrors, and this is a way to, get people to not do that, stay away from them. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know, it's like, feels very superstitious. I mean, mirrors are like highly superstitious as well. I mean, like there's so much, just like, things to do with luck and things to do with, like that are like, it is kind of a weird, like, like object, I guess, too. It's like, it's, literally not just to do with like occult magic, but stage magic, it's like, it's all smoke and mirrors, like when you want to do a trick, like it's like, this
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's like, it's all like, it's like, it's not real. It's like, it clearly has like obviously the effect of like things are in reverse. Like it's not, it doesn't even show like an actual, unless you have like a secondary mirror surface, it doesn't show you reality as it's even perceived, like
Yeah,
perceived,
yeah.
it's backwards. So it's like, it's a
Yeah,
mirror
yeah.
image. So, yeah,
Well,
it's
and if you go to the idea of like other worlds and things like that, that kind of idea of when you get uh kind of different variations on Plato's versions of, real worlds and imitation worlds. I mean, like he's got it's the concept of forms, there's like this pure form of the world and then finally descends to like what we have here. This is an approximation of this great form of the world, the perfect chair, the archetypal chair that manifests as the myriad forms of chairs, that we get to enjoy. And so this idea of these other worlds, now, like throughout history, there is one way overwhelmingly that people have gotten in touch with spirits: dreams. And that is overwhelmingly the way of talking to the dead. But what is that? Like, it's like a world that's not quite this world. It's a little different. There are variations, you know, things that it looks like this world when you're in that world, but some things don't. People that were dead aren't, or rooms that don't exist do, or, you know, that kind of idea. So it's like, well, and not to just say the primitive minds of people of the past and mistaking this for, well, no, but think about, how do you make sense of this? That you had every sensory experience of walking through this reality, but it wasn't. You know, it was this other kind of reality. And so, like, well, what's going on? Like, what is the distrust of the mirror, that, you know, that it may be like a tricky thing, you know, and there's nothing there's nothing to force it to show up in a certain way. And then if you add to it the actual experiences of people seeing things distort, whether it's through tricks of the cones and rods of the eyes, trying to constantly refresh and get a stable image, or because when you give yourself a means of manifestation for a spirit to show up, they do. Then those are like the opposite extremes, right? You know, like one is like, it's merely it's just the eyes. It's just your damn eyes, you know? And then the other extreme is like, no, it's straight up spirits can do these things, you know? And then there are all kinds of explanations in between. But
Well,
but
maybe
there's
there. I wonder if there's a thing too. Like, I mean, obviously, like mirrors up until general modern times. If you go to, like ancient times, are pretty rare things, right? Like they're
yeah.
like it's like usually a polished metal, something like that. Like with Egyptian stuff. It's like so like these. It's definitely like a tool of like the. It's a wealthy thing. It's not going to be like something most people are going to have access to, right? So I guess it's like the other thing, or like you'd see your reflection in like the river or something. I think there might be just some kind of weird idea of like this like being scared of something jumping out of the river, like I don't know, a crocodile and eating
Mhm.
you, and that's why you look down to see your reflection and something grabs you, like, and that's why like there's like some kind of some kind
Yeah,
of
like, is there some
memory
kind
of
of
like oh
ancestral
like
memory
so the
kind of woven in?
superstition kind of gets built on that idea of like anytime sometimes people would see the reflections and they'd end up getting pulled under into a river or a lake or something.
Well, what about this? I mean, this is a simpler
Yeah.
idea. I mean, you guys heard of doppelgangers, okay? And there are people
Yeah,
that
yeah.
swear up and down that doppelgangers are a real thing. And I almost wonder if like the concept of seeing yourself in the mirror is almost like that of like the idea of a doppelganger. It's like that looks like me, but that's not me. I'm here. How can I be there? I'm here. In like a much simpler time, like going back, hundreds of years or
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
or 20 minutes ago, whatever.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it could be something as simple as that idea where it's like that's me, but it's not me. It must be evil
Mhm.
then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the like like the like the mirror universe of Star Trek. It's evil Spock. Yes, the evil good.
It's interesting though, because it does like sort of preserve that weird kind of practice of, okay, like going back to the idea of like, to show like who you're gonna marry. The question of, can you see your future husband? I remember hearing a thing of like a variation on it. You look at a mirror in the dark and you comb your hair in the mirror, and you're supposed to see your spouse in the mirror. But again, it's like you do this thing in front of this mirror. It's this ritual action. But all these things are like these threshold experiences, because like you're not supposed to do them. Like, you're not supposed to summon up Bloody Mary. You're not supposed to. But you certainly aren't supposed to summon the boogeyman. But like you're not supposed to, um, uh, uh, go to the crossroads and meet the devil. You're not supposed to do these things. When you step outside of, like, what happens, psychologically speaking, when you step outside of the what I'll just call like the social contract of the things you're like supposed to slash are allowed to do, it's almost like you're in this ungoverned world. Like you've stepped outside of those things that when you're a kid, that's like, I don't know, it's like your parents and maybe like the church or whatever your authority figures are. But when you step outside of that, it's like, well, now you're in the world of, you're not like so protected anymore. You know, you're like, you're in the, you've crossed the threshold into the wild where the other things are. And what does that do in order to like prime the mind for those experiences? Not to say that those experiences are not therefore quote unquote real, but what if one of the means of manifestation is a sort of stirred up mind, one that's on edge, you know.
So let's take it a step further. Let's take it a step further. So let's pretend for a second that that Bloody Mary is in fact real. That you can in fact summon this thing at will, more or less. You know,
Yeah.
what are the implications of that? You know, you could if you could do that. So my thing. Always go back to money because
Yeah.
we're in the United States, capitalism, why not? Okay. So how could you make money off of this? I mean, you could like sell tickets to this kind of thing. You can have this thing, you know, just sheer proof of it. I mean, what does that do? You know, we could have t-shirts made. I summoned Bloody Mary and I survived. And all I got was this lousy t-shirt.
Well, I mean, that kind of begs the question is like, because the effects are so, it's all random. Like, is it the thing that you summon it and it murders you? Is that if that's the case, then that's that doesn't really, that doesn't really. Is it just that it does like a weird prediction of like, oh, are you gonna get who you're gonna marry? Like, is it like a future prediction kind of thing? Like you're like saying like it's like so that would really like have like the implications because like if it's real and then you summon it and it murders you, well, then that's not going to sell a lot of tickets. I don't know. I mean, we have things that can do that already. I mean, it's like that. It doesn't have to do with the supernatural. I mean, like, and if it's like a Russian roulette thing, like, well, it may murder you, but it's guaranteed someone's going to get murdered. Like, then again, we could do these things without supernatural implications. These are not difficult. you know.
See, now
It's more fun with the supernatural episodes.
Yes, yeah, but I mean, like, but just like, but generally speaking, yeah, it's like I think your repeat customers are going to be pretty low on the,
But you could sell tangentially related products because if Bloody Mary can show up in mirrors, then other things can show up in mirrors. And do you want them looking at all your little private parts, your tiny private parts? Not suggesting you guys. Not suggesting you guys have to worry about that. I'm not selling you anything. I'm just saying, there's a whole market out there that doesn't want their stuff seen. You could sell like a special cloth,
a special mirror. Like you could just not buy mirrors. Like I mean, like it's a.
Well, okay, so let's
we already have Ring doorbells and like so. I mean, Amazon has listening devices in all our most of our homes or so we already kind of don't have to worry about
messing up my business plan.
mirror spirits when we have spies.
So let's hang on that for 1 second. So mirrors, I believe there's a religion. I want to say it's Judaism, but I am not 100% sure. Isn't there something with mirrors there? I don't know if it's like when someone dies, you're supposed to cover up all the mirrors. Is this ringing a bell with anyone? Does this sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah.
I think it's just an old isn't that more like an old Irish kind of tradition, like in the house or something like that?
I think there are a couple weird death traditions around there, and I'm not sure if it's like so they don't get trapped there or like that's a thing too. But
yeah, because I think it would probably be times where people would do actual wakes in your home, like where you're to they would just because you'd have the body would be in the dining room, it's so that would probably be for something like that.
Well, and again, it's hearkening back to a time when we were much more acquainted with death, where the funeral parlor was your parlor.
Yeah.
And the family member was probably being buried in your yard, in the family cemetery, because y'all just lived on the same land probably from the.
Well, even in the cities, like my dad said when he was like a little kid, I guess it was his I want to say it was his great grandfather when he passed away. It was in like his house in Philly, and he was just laid out like in the dining room, and they had to take the big windows off the thing to then move the casket out
Oh,
after
wow.
the couple days and out into the basically like the funeral thing, and it was like something like that. So even then they were still doing that kind of stuff
Yeah.
stuff, and it was like and they
Hmm.
just like, and his like, again, it's something like whatever it was, like his great aunt or something was like a professional mourner. Like she just would sit because people had to sit with the body like all at throughout the couple days of the wake or whatever, and like so that's all she did was she like just she would
Yeah.
go and sit with so it's like, so there is like so that was, yeah, so that like definitely did happen even not in non rural like setting, it was like so and I'm sure that's like an end vestige of that period of time, but it's like, yeah, so it's kind of weird,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the other thing, I mean, if you've got, what are the implications of if Bloody Mary were real, and let's say she doesn't kill you, but this entity shows up in mirrors. Well, that suggests something about life. It suggests that some form of you might exist after life. And what does that do about how you treat people in this life? So it's like the idea of the implications of an afterlife, depending on the shape of it and things like that, can be vast. And so it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Again, like what are the ramifications of something like that?
But it does seem that mirror spirits are kind of vengeful spirits. They do have a. It doesn't. They don't seem to have a chill vibe to them.
That's not necessarily, yeah, like probably like because we know of the ghost story versions of them, but actually there's an old practice. I believe it goes back to an old Greek practice. A contemporary person named Raymond Moody created a way of doing it. It's called the psychomantium. It's basically you're setting up a similar, like it's a scrying experience slash ghost encounter type experience, and you build this little room, and most people that do the psychomantium experience have an encounter with a deceased relative. And it's often not the person they expect. It's and that's always interesting when there's a surprise element to it. It's like, oh yeah, see, the coolest animal is my power animal, of course. But it's like, no, when it surprises you, it's like, whoa, hold up, I wasn't expecting Uncle Joe, like that. That's odd. But but they're not necessarily negative experiences. They're usually positive experiences. So any of you listeners out there that want to give it a go, look up Raymond Moody and the Psychomantium. It's kind of an interesting little thing, and brings us back to Bloody Mary again.
Should we put a cap on it and give some final the things and a
Yeah.
rating?
Yeah, let me. I'll start this off, but I will say too. If anyone has actually had a Bloody Mary experience, I'd love to hear about it. So throw that down in the comments because that would be awesome. Because
Dan's gonna read all of the.
I will, and I'll encourage anyone that is remotely interested to give it a try. And you get bonus points if someone like locks you in a linen closet that has a mirror or something like that.
Also leave a rating on iTunes with your story, or drop
Absolutely.
drop us an email.
Absolutely.
You know.
So recognition, I think everybody or most people are familiar on a macro scale what Bloody Mary was even before listening to this. So I think from a recognition perspective, from a tourist trap iconography, I think I would give Bloody Mary 5 monsters. I think without a doubt, it's if you've grown up in the United States in the past 30 years or so, I think you're familiar with what it's all about. Scary factor for me. I don't like mirrors, so I'm giving this like 4.5 monsters. Part of me wants to give it a try and like report back and like do like a short video or a short episode with my experience, but I don't
When
know that
Dan
I
doesn't
have
return. the next episode.
I don't think I have the bravery to do that. I don't know. One of these days, maybe, but I don't know. And that ties into like, is it real? I am like 99% sure that it's all your eyes. It's all your eyes adjusting to the dark. But there's that 1% of me that's like, I don't want to take that chance. And like that, do I want to encounter it? Absolutely not. So for not encountering, I guess, do we rate that high or do we rate that low if we want to? I guess do we
Um,
want to encounter it? I'm going to put that down at like a half a monster. I
yeah,
have no
yeah. I think it's if you
interest.
want to, like, Chris might want to meet Bigfoot, but he might not want to meet.
Yeah, I've
But
zero interest in meeting Bloody Mary. So that's my stance.
Mhm.
All right. Do you
So,
want to
yeah,
go next, or
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with Dan on the recognition front. It's pretty. I mean, like, there's so many movies, so many popular culture, and the fact that like the seemingly mirror spirits, at least in various cultures, and you know, even in this general folklore of like something evil in the mirror can be like 11th century type stuff. So there's definitely that, and then like but I think the modern summing it up scary is like, yeah, definitely a core playground, scare thing. So
Yeah,
I probably
yeah.
put that in definitely at like a four. Scary factor. Yeah, mirrors at night just are scary. Like whether it is the Caputo like effect thing or it is that kind of thing. I don't particularly like mirrors. Don't know why. I definitely don't like them at night. Like I definitely don't like them when they're really big. Like
Carol Ann.
yeah, yeah. On like a little side bar in the thing. My sister just bought a new house, and when I went over to see it over the holidays, up in her bedroom, my brother-in-law is extremely large, and he always wanted a mirror that he could see his whole self in. Like, I mean, because he's like 6'7", 6'8", or whatever, and he like they in their bedroom at the foot of their bed, they now have this mirror that is enormous, and they joked, they said, "Is something gonna come through that at night?" Get you.
That is a door. That's not a mirror. That is a door.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's like it's bigger than the door. Like that's the thing. It's like the mirror is bigger than the doorway. Like so it was like, but yeah, so scary factor mirrors at night. Yeah, I'm gonna put that pretty high. That's definitely in my core thing. Now, am I scared necessarily of the demon part of it? I don't know, but it definitely is that. So I'll give that a 5. Is it real? I'm gonna say like no. I do think it is something that's like we are messing around with, like it's like that. It's just like it's seeing stuff at nighttime in the mirror, the distortion factor, the half asleep factor, or even like the dream factor. It's like I think that's like so. I'm gonna put that kind of low. Like I think it's I'll give that a 1, and then yeah, do you want to encounter it? Well, if it is real, no, I don't want to encounter a demon that's gonna kill me. Like that doesn't mean I feel like I'm not sold on Dan's business of of the tourist demons murders you. It's a bad business model. So I'm gonna give that a 1, and yeah. So I think overall though I'll give Bloody Mary she gets a solid 3. I think a solid 3 because mirrors at night are scary, and so yeah. That's what.
All right, so I'm going to go with recognition. I'm going to go with the same bit. Everybody seems to know some version of this Bloody Mary story with its requirements and background and all that stuff. Um, so I guess I'm just going to give that, I don't know. Should I just give that 5 monsters? Um, Scary. Yeah. Yeah, it is scary. It's really scary. And particularly when you're likely to encounter mirrors in the dark. Well, first of all, it's already dark out, you know. You might be a little sleep deprived. You're in that other world, you know, so you're a little more prone to the wiggles of the imagination. I'm gonna say that's really scary. I'm gonna give it probably like 4.5 monsters, 4 and a headless monster. Because there are certainly more scary things than that, but it's pretty damn scary. And then, do I want to meet this being? It depends. It depends. So while it would be scary, it depends. So if it's like the dead witch, that isn't necessarily going to kill you. I think there could be advantages to gaining the alliance of a dead witch. Um, so it might not be all bad. So I'm gonna put it on a 3, especially since I try to summon things in mirrors anyway. So I'll give it a 3. Um, because also, yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3.5. Three and a headless monster. I kind of do want to encounter it, but under my own terms. So no Poltergeist 2 rules here. Like pure regular summoning, and I'll bring an offering. So don't kill me.
So one thing I'll add to that too, I wonder if this is like a Beetlejuice kind of thing. Like what happens if you summon, assuming you can summon Bloody Mary, okay? And you have to assume, because it's based on historical people, there's only one of them, okay? Let's just assume that.
Right,
okay?
right.
So if someone summons the Bloody Mary and like this thing comes out and it's like clawing its way down the bathroom, trying to like catch up to you, and someone else goes to summon it, is it like whisked away? Or is it like, they don't see anything? It's like, oh, it didn't come up. Not real. Like,
Or do you get some kind of a thing like, we're sorry, all of our Bloody Marys are involved in haunting experiences.
Yeah.
definitely that. Definitely
Your
that.
summoning is very important to us.
Yeah. It's like, the mirror just goes doo doo doo. Like, it's like my mirror is broken.
Well, there is only one way to find out, and I guess that's where we leave it. I wonder where we go from here, though, in terms of where does this lead us for our next conversation?
No, I guess I mean, they were talking about mirrors being, thresholds, and getting back to our threshold thing. Let's just talk straight up about like the liminal spaces, like the weird spaces in between
like
worlds.
the mirror world.
The back rooms, the stuff that's just the ordinary, like that, the like labyrinths, like the lost in the nowhere in between worlds.